The first time she noticed the pause, it was almost imperceptible. Mara had asked a simple question, the kind that barely warranted thought, but he hesitated. Just for a moment, long enough for her to sense something behind the words he didn't yet say. That pause, it hung in the air, almost tangible, pulling her attention in a way nothing else could. It was past 11 p.m., and the streetlights outside her apartment painted long shadows across her living room. Mara sat curled on the sofa with a mug of tea cooling between her hands. Across from her, Julian reclined in the armchair he had claimed the night before, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the room. She had always noticed small details in people, how their hands fidgeted when nervous, the way their eyes darted just before they spoke. Tonight, every shift in him seemed magnified, each breath a rhythm she could almost hear. "Do you think it'll be okay?" she had asked, her voice softer than she intended. She didn't even know what she meant by it exactly, only that the question felt like a bridge she had to build. Julian's eyes met hers after that brief pause, and she realized she had been waiting for him to answer something bigger than the words themselves. The pause stretched, and in it, she felt a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Mara wrapped her arms around her knees, leaning back against the sofa's worn fabric. Julian shifted slightly, and she noticed the weight of the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried a weight, a subtle gravity that seemed to draw her closer without movement. She wondered, briefly, if he even realized how quiet he had become, how much he had revealed without saying anything. The city outside was still, save for the occasional hum of a passing car. It was a night that seemed suspended, the kind that demanded attention to the smallest details. Mara could hear the faint scrape of Julian's shoe against the rug, the quiet intake of his breath, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Every sound, every movement, seemed amplified in that pause. She realized she had been studying him without noticing she was doing it, as if the silence itself had given her permission to observe, to notice more than she usually allowed herself. Finally, he spoke, his voice even, calm, but carrying the weight of a thought processed in the stillness. "Yes. I think it will be okay." The words were simple, almost mundane, but Mara felt the pause linger like an echo. It wasn't the answer that had moved her, it was the hesitation before it, the space where everything unspoken hovered. In that pause, she noticed him, not just what he said, but who he was beneath the surface. She tried to shift the moment, to ground herself in conversation that wouldn't feel so loaded. They talked about trivial things, the sort of nighttime chatter that fills the spaces between silences. Yet, each topic felt tinged by that earlier pause, every sentence layered with an awareness she couldn't quite shake. Mara realized she had been waiting for more than answers, she had been waiting for understanding, a connection deeper than words alone could provide. By the time the clock ticked past 11:45 p.m., Mara was aware that the room felt smaller, more intimate, and that the pause had left an invisible thread between them. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth settle in her chest, aware that she would remember this quiet, subtle tension for a long time. She wondered if Julian felt it too, or if it was just her imagination, the kind that spins meaning from stillness and quiet glances. There was a comfort in the moment, fragile and fleeting, that made her heart both lighter and heavier at once. She realized that sometimes, it wasn't the words that mattered but the silence surrounding them. It was the pauses, the hesitation, the moments when someone thought before answering, that revealed the deepest truths. And tonight, she had noticed more than words, she had noticed him. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The pause lingered even after the sentence left her lips, a reminder that sometimes noticing was more profound than speaking. Mara wondered what else she might see if she simply stayed quiet, if she allowed herself to pay attention. The thought made her both curious and apprehensive. She looked up at Julian, and his gaze met hers once more, this time carrying a question she wasn't ready to answer. Something unsaid hovered in the air, a quiet tension that invited her to step closer, though she wasn't sure in what way. It was a question without words, and it made her pulse quicken ever so slightly. Mara couldn't shake the lingering sense of that quiet question. It hovered in the room like the soft glow of the streetlights through her window, subtle but undeniable. She tried to focus on her mug, swirling the tea as if doing so could make the tension evaporate. But Julian's presence had a gravity that pulled at her attention, whether she liked it or not. He cleared his throat, a small, almost imperceptible sound, and she felt her pulse hitch. "Do you ever feel like some nights are meant to happen this way?" His voice was low, careful, almost testing the air before releasing the words. Mara tilted her head, considering. The question wasn't strange, but it carried a weight, a softness that felt like it could break open if handled wrong. I think I do," she said finally, keeping her voice steady, though her fingers tightened around the warm mug. "Some nights feel bigger somehow. Like they're meant to be remembered." Her own words surprised her. She hadn't planned to speak with such intimacy, but the room seemed to demand it, filled as it was with the quiet that had grown between them. Julian nodded slowly, eyes tracing the patterns of shadows across the walls. "Exactly. Like there's a reason we're here, right now, noticing things we wouldn't notice any other time." His words weren't just about the night, they were about her, about them, though not in a way she could define yet. Mara felt a strange mix of curiosity and apprehension. The world outside had faded to a whisper, it was just the two of them in a bubble that felt fragile and sacred. She set her mug down, careful not to make too much noise. "Do you ever think about what could have been, if we'd made different choices?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and the silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Julian's gaze flickered to her, and for a moment, the room felt impossibly small. "I do," he admitted. His words were quiet, but there was a weight in them that made her stomach twist with unexpected emotion. "But sometimes, what could have been doesn't matter as much as what is." The pause after that was long, intentional, as if he were letting the truth of it settle between them. Mara could feel it. She could feel every unspoken thought, every hesitation and half-formed feeling. She leaned back into the sofa, letting the softness of the cushions cradle her. "I guess," she began, pausing to find the right words, "I guess some moments stay with you because they catch you off guard. You notice things you wouldn't normally, people, expressions, little gestures. And suddenly, it feels like you're seeing someone fully, for the first time." She glanced at him, and for a brief second, she thought she saw something like relief flash across his face. The room was still again, but now the silence was layered with something fragile and heavy. Mara's thoughts raced, though her body remained still, anchored by the sofa and the quiet gravity of Julian's presence. It was strange, how noticing someone could feel so intimate without a single word hinting at romance. She realized she had been watching him, studying the way his hands rested on the armrest, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes softened in the low light. Every small detail seemed amplified. "I notice more when it's quiet like this," she said, almost to herself. "When there's space to see people, instead of just hearing them. It's like you get the real them, the part they don't show immediately." Julian's gaze met hers again, and she thought she might be imagining a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Then maybe these pauses," he said carefully, "are more important than the words that follow. Sometimes, the silence tells you everything you need to know." The idea settled over her like a gentle weight. She realized that he was right. The pause before his words, that quiet hesitation, had revealed more than any conversation could. Outside, the city seemed to lean in, the streetlights flickering faintly as though acknowledging the fragile moment inside. Mara's fingers drummed lightly on the mug, a nervous rhythm she couldn't quite control. The night had a kind of magic, subtle and quiet, and she was acutely aware that this small window of time might never come again. And yet, in the quiet between them, a question lingered, one neither had voiced, but both felt pressing. Mara's chest tightened slightly, a mix of curiosity and unease, as if the night itself was asking her to pay attention. The apartment had grown colder without her noticing. Mara pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the soft fabric offering a kind of comfort against the intangible tension that filled the room. Julian remained in his chair, silent now, but the air between them was far from empty. It was charged with something unspoken, a quiet intensity that made every small sound, the clock ticking, the distant hum of traffic, feel magnified. "I keep thinking about that pause," she admitted softly, almost to herself. Her words floated in the room, and she watched as Julian's eyes lifted to meet hers. The corners of his lips were faintly curved, a shadow of a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Mara's heart thumped faster, though she told herself it was just the anticipation of hearing him speak again. "You mean the one before I answered last time?" he asked, his voice gentle, as though testing the boundaries of the conversation. Mara nodded, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. "Yes. It stayed with me. The space between your question and your answer felt important. Like I saw something real, in that brief moment." She swallowed, feeling a warmth she couldn't explain, a pull toward him that had nothing to do with words. Julian leaned back slightly, as if considering her observation. "I don't even remember thinking about it consciously," he said. "But maybe that's the thing. Sometimes, the moments that matter most aren't the ones we analyze. They just happen. And later, we realize we've noticed more than we should have." His voice was quiet, steady, yet it carried a weight that made Mara's pulse quicken. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why it's hard to explain. Because it's not about the words themselves. It's about what we feel in between them, what we notice without trying." Her gaze wandered to the window, where the moon cast a soft glow across the room. She felt exposed, but in a way that was comforting rather than frightening. Julian was listening, truly listening, and that alone made the silence feel like it held something sacred. For a long moment, neither spoke. Mara watched his profile, the way his jawline caught the light, the subtle tension in his shoulders. She realized she had been unconsciously cataloging these details for weeks, noticing him in a way that was almost intrusive, yet entirely involuntary. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a quiet recognition of presence, a kind of awareness she hadn't allowed herself to feel so deeply before. "I wonder if we notice the wrong things sometimes," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Or maybe the right things, but too late. By the time we see clearly, the moment has passed." Julian's eyes softened, and he tilted his head slightly, as though considering how to respond. "Maybe we notice them at the exact right time," he said. "Even if it doesn't feel that way. Maybe the pause, the hesitation, the silence, it all happens when we're ready, even if we don't realize it." Mara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from cold but from the weight of his words. They resonated in her chest, a quiet echo of everything she had been feeling without knowing it. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread slowly, grounding her. "It's strange," she said, "how noticing someone, really noticing them, can make time feel different. Like the world stops for a second, just so you can pay attention." Her words hung in the room, delicate as the light filtering through the blinds. Julian's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching, and for the first time, she felt the possibility of understanding him without needing explanations. The quiet stretched, comfortable and unnerving at once. Mara realized that she had been holding her breath, caught in the gravity of the moment. She wanted to speak, to say more, but she feared that breaking the silence might undo its fragile balance. Instead, she simply watched him, noticing every subtle shift, every micro-expression, every pause that spoke volumes more than words ever could. A soft knock at the door made her startle, and she glanced toward it reflexively. It was unexpected, almost intrusive, but in that interruption, the moment felt suspended. Julian's head turned toward the sound, and Mara's heart fluttered in anticipation. Whatever awaited beyond the door, she knew that it would change the rhythm of the night. Mara rose slowly, each step toward the door deliberate, as if moving too quickly might shatter the delicate tension in the room. Julian remained seated, his eyes following her with a quiet attentiveness that made her pause mid-step. The knock had been soft, almost hesitant, yet it carried an urgency that stirred a strange flutter in her chest. She opened the door just enough to see the figure on the other side, a neighbor, holding a small parcel. "Sorry to bother you this late," the voice said, courteous and unassuming. Mara took the package, nodding politely. "No problem. Thank you." As the door closed, she turned back toward the living room, her thoughts still tangled with the lingering pause that had followed Julian's previous words. He looked at her expectantly, but not impatiently. "Everything okay?" he asked, and in the ordinary tone of his voice, she found another layer of intimacy. Ordinary care, quiet attention, it was grounding. She set the parcel down on the table and returned to her spot on the sofa, feeling the familiar weight of the night pressing in around them. Yeah, she murmured. Just a late delivery. But even as she spoke, her mind wandered back to the pause, the hesitation that had marked every conversation between them in these quiet hours. It was like a rhythm, subtle and precise, that drew her in without her even realizing it. Julian's presence had become a constant she didn't want to disrupt, yet it was impossible not to notice him. Do you think we ever really notice how much someone's presence affects us? She asked, her voice softer now, almost contemplative. Julian leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his expression calm yet reflective. I think we notice it more than we admit, he said. But it takes a moment like this, quiet, uninterrupted, to realize it fully. His words carried a weight that resonated deep in her chest, a quiet understanding that left her breathless in the most subtle way. Mara sipped her tea again, letting the warmth settle in her stomach as if it could steady the fluttering of her heart. It's strange, she said, how we can be surrounded by people and noise, and still not really see them. But in silence, in pauses, it's like we can finally notice what matters. Julian nodded slowly, his gaze steady, and for a moment, she felt like the world had contracted around them, leaving only the room, the soft light, and the unspoken understanding they shared. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug absently, and she realized she had been holding her breath again. The weight of the night, the quiet intimacy of noticing someone deeply, it was both comforting and unsettling. I wonder, she whispered, if noticing someone this way changes the way you remember them forever. Julian's expression softened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing at his lips. I think it does, he said. Even the smallest gestures, the briefest pauses, can leave the biggest marks. Sometimes we don't even realize it until much later. Mara felt the truth in his words settle over her, a quiet warmth that made her want to stay in this suspended moment for as long as possible. The world outside had faded into background noise, leaving only the shared awareness between them. Minutes passed in near silence, the kind that didn't feel empty but full of subtle exchanges, glances, half-smiles, small movements. Each one carried meaning, though unspoken. Mara's chest felt lighter and heavier at once, filled with the weight of recognition, the acknowledgement that noticing someone could be more profound than conversation. Then, a soft sound from the kitchen made her glance toward it, a clatter of utensils, barely noticeable, yet it drew her attention like a small ripple in the quiet pond. Julian's eyes followed hers, and in that shared glance, Mara felt a subtle shift. The night had been gentle, intimate, and quiet, but that sound reminded her that life intruded, even in its softest moments. She realized that the night, the pause, and the quiet observation of Julian had changed something within her. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she knew she wouldn't forget this evening, wouldn't forget the way silence and hesitation had spoken more than any words could. And yet, a new awareness tugged at her, a curiosity about what the next interruption, the next pause, might reveal. The night had grown even quieter, as if the city itself had slowed to match the rhythm of Mara's thoughts. She sat back on the sofa, her fingers tracing the fabric absent-mindedly, her mind replaying each pause, each subtle glance, each word Julian had spoken. The room seemed fuller now, not with objects, but with unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet presence that made her heart both steady and anxious at the same time. Julian's gaze lingered on her, calm but intent. There was no pressure in his look, only a steady attentiveness that made her feel both seen and understood. She realized how deeply she had noticed him over the past hours, not just the answers he gave, but the hesitation, the spaces in between, the subtle ways he carried himself. That awareness had grown into something heavier, more profound, without either of them saying it aloud. I never realized how much a pause could mean, she said softly, finally breaking the silence. Julian tilted his head, studying her, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes the pause is more honest than the answer, he replied. It's when the mind catches up, when the heart speaks before the words even form. Mara nodded, letting the warmth of that thought settle in her chest. It was as if every hesitation, every quiet moment they had shared tonight, had been building toward this awareness. She set her mug aside, leaning forward slightly. I think that's why this night feels different. I've noticed you in ways I haven't before. Not just your words, but everything around them. It makes everything feel heavier and lighter at the same time, like the night itself is pressing in on me, but in a comforting way. Julian's lips curved into a small, understanding smile. "That's how noticing works," he said. "It's subtle, it sneaks in quietly, and then suddenly, you're aware of everything you didn't see before." The soft glow from the streetlights painted his face in gentle shadows, highlighting the calm steadiness in his expression. Mara's chest tightened slightly, a strange mix of admiration and something she couldn't quite name. She realized the night had allowed her to see more than she normally would, the subtle shifts in him, the way his eyes softened at moments, the brief flickers of thought before he spoke. She had been noticing, truly noticing, and it had changed the way she felt about the ordinary world around her. Julian leaned back, hands resting loosely on his knees, and for the first time, Mara felt that the pauses between them were complete, that the space they had been sharing was neither empty nor lacking. It had been building, layering unspoken understanding over quiet observation, until it became something tangible, something she could feel without words. She laughed quietly, a sound full of relief and wonder. "It's strange," she said, "how a single pause can hold so much meaning. I never thought I'd notice so much in one night." Julian's eyes softened even further. Noticing isn't just about seeing. It's about understanding, feeling, realizing the weight of something before it even has a name. That's why this night matters, it's ours, in a way we didn't plan but somehow needed. Mara felt her fingers loosen from the mug, her hands resting in her lap as she absorbed the calm intimacy of the room. The night outside was quiet, distant, yet full of life. Here, inside, the pauses, the hesitation, the attention they had given one another, these were alive. Every small glance, every silent acknowledgement had built a bridge she hadn't expected, one that connected them in a subtle, almost fragile way. "I think I understand now," she murmured. "Noticing someone isn't just about observation. It's about letting them exist fully in the moment with you. Letting the silence speak, letting the pauses guide you." Julian nodded, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Exactly. And when you do, you find yourself changed. You notice more, care more, and somehow, even the simplest nights feel profound." Mara leaned back, a quiet contentment settling over her. The tension, the anticipation, the subtle uncertainty, they had all woven together into something that felt significant, even in its quietness. She realized that sometimes, the most important moments weren't the ones filled with words or action, but the ones lived in stillness, in shared awareness. The clock ticked past midnight, the soft sound punctuating the calm. Mara took a deep breath, letting the realization sink in fully. She had noticed him tonight, truly noticed him, and in doing so, she had noticed herself. The night would remain with her forever, not because of dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but because of the pauses, the quiet understanding, and the tender weight of observation that had made everything feel alive. The room held them both in its gentle embrace, the silence now comforting, filled with everything unspoken yet deeply understood. The pause had passed, but its effect lingered, leaving Mara with a warmth and clarity that would follow her long after the night ended.